The idea that there is an invisible veil that separates the realm of the living from the realm of the dead is one that has always interested me. It's one that we see in many different cultures. During the fall on Halloween or the pagan holiday of Samhain, many believe that this is when the veil is at its thinnest. This is when communing with spirits on the other side is easiest. But what if there was no veil and both worlds coexisted in the same space, with only certain individuals able to see both realms? In the world of Banishers, ghosts and lingering spirits are reality. There is an ongoing battle between those who wish to protect the living from the dead, those who believe that there can be a balance between the two, and those who would sacrifice the living in dark rituals to abstract whatever power and knowledge they can from the dead. This year I'd like to explore the world building and lore behind more fictional projects, whether that's movies, games or book series. So a huge thanks to Don't Nod and Focus Entertainment for allowing me early access to the world of Banishers: Ghosts of New Eden. The universe of Banishers is set in 17th century North America, the colony of Massachusetts to be precise. Outside of the game, Massachusetts, or at least the town of Salem, is most well known for the mass hysteria surrounding the Salem witch trials, where over 200 people were accused of witchcraft, 30 of them were found guilty and 19 were executed. The game takes place around the same time, which gives us an insight into the conflicts and attitudes towards witchcraft and the supernatural. As a player, your journey begins in the town of New Eden, the third attempt made by the English Puritans to colonize this part of the North American seaboard. After some turbulent times, the town's fortune appeared to be changing for the better, but this was only a brief respite from their troubles. The settlers of New Eden began to experience horrific nightmares. Babies fell ill, children were lost, and the harvesting of crops began to fail. The winter of 1694 felt like an eternity, and 1695 saw no change. The only way to keep their children safe was to send them away. The colony was convinced it had been cursed, and so it sent out calls for help to anyone who would listen. Their calls were answered by Antea and Red, the two banishers who you, as the player, control. Your first task is to lift the curse. Before we go any further, there are many questions to answer, including what a banisher is and why they are needed in this world. Earlier we mentioned the idea of a veil that separates the world of the living from the world of the dead. In the Banishers universe there are several different realms. The two main forms are the incarnate and the invisible. The incarnate is the physical world, a place of heat and fire. This is the realm perceived by the living, and is bound by the laws of space and time. The invisible is a place of ice and cold. This is the realm perceived by the dead. It still exists in the same time and space as the incarnate, but one's perception can change reality. A week in the incarnate, for example, could feel like seconds in the invisible, or seconds could feel like a week. A small room in the incarnate could feel like the entire world in the invisible. Those who are unaware of the invisible are unable to interact with it. For spirits in general, it's slightly different. As they were once living and part of the incarnate, they can perceive it and, in some cases, interact with the living. However, this is limited. They cannot see the world as a whole. It is blurry and indistinct unless they focus on an individual or location. For humans to see the entirety of the invisible, it requires a spirit to willingly share their vision. This is called a soul tie and occurs when a spirit haunts a human. The soul tie goes both ways. For a spirit to be able to see the incarnate in its fullest and not just a blur, they require a human or an item to act as a hook or beacon into the physical world. It is extremely rare, but there are some humans who are born with innate talents or learned skills who can interact and perceive the invisible without supernatural assistance. Almost every being in the Banishers universe is made up of a combination of flesh and essence. There is a gravitational pull between the body and soul. The flesh is tied to the incarnate, but it can be animated by an essence. The essence belongs to the invisible, but when it is rooted in incarnate flesh, the soul will thrive. There is a constant balance between the two. Humans, for example, have a strong flesh, but as they get older and the flesh begins to decay, this is when the essence begins to bloom. Animals have a strong flesh which also decays, but in their case they have no essence. A ghost is a human being who has died but remains after death due to unfinished or unresolved business. This can range from something extremely important to something quite trivial. At times the ghosts may not even know why they have remained. Whilst in the incarnate, despite not having a flesh, their essence remains strong. They retain most of their memories, emotions, personality, and knowledge. However, over time these will begin to fade and they will become a spectre. How long it takes for a ghost to transform depends on how strong their tie to the incarnate is. If their tie is strong and their motivation remains, this process can take a significant amount of time. Once the motivation and purpose to remain in the incarnate begins to fade, a ghost's essence weakens to the point where they become a spectre. A spectre is a ghost that has lost all sense of identity and purpose. Memories fade and the only thing that matters is maintaining their strength, which they do by stealing essence from the living. Being haunted by a spectre is far more dangerous than an ordinary ghost. However, as they have no strong tie to a place or person, they can be moved on much easier than an ordinary ghost. Dealing with the dead and these otherworldly beings is an art that has existed for thousands of years and is somewhat of an occult science in the world of Banishers. There are 3 branches or schools that have their own unique philosophy and specialized techniques when it comes to this ancient art. These 3 branches originated from the same ancient religion of Orphism in ancient Greece, the followers of Orpheus. Over time there were disagreements and schisms between the followers, and so they branched off into their own schools of thought. The Banishers are mercenary ghost hunters. For the most part, they are seen as helpful, benevolent agents who will always prioritize protecting the living from the lingering dead. Their main objective is to keep the incarnate and the invisible separate. When dealing with spirits, some believe the Banisher's main goal is to bring closure. This is achieved by gathering the ghost and all those concerned. They can then explore the conflict or reason behind the haunting. Once there is a resolution, the ghost can ascend and the haunting will come to an end. This is the peaceful approach. However, it is not always the quickest, and some Banishers prefer to banish the ghost. Rather than listening to the ghost and attempting to offer closure, a Banisher can perform a powerful ritual that compels the ghost to leave by force. Banishing a ghost sends them into the void and denies them any chance of ascending. A spectre, for example, can only be banished. The third option is one most Banishers would never consider. Closure can be offered to a spirit by placing the blame on the living. This ritual sacrifices the living and strips them of their essence. This is not an option to be taken lightly, and many do not even learn the ritual. There is no set moral code or dogma that dictates how a Banisher must deal with the dead. It is down to their own individual discretion. A Banisher's main calling is to protect the living from the dead, but it's still a job. They are still mercenaries for hire. Some may be more empathetic to those involved and offer full closure to both parties. Others may wish to get the job done as quickly as possible, and so banishing the ghost might be the quickest option. You as the player experience the game through the lens of 2 Banishers, Red, who is alive, and his lover Antea, who is dead. You will face tough decisions. Do you offer closure because you believe it is the correct thing to do, or do you blame the settler and use their essence to help resurrect your lost lover? The choice is yours, and so are the consequences. Banishers are not the only group that can blame, banish, or offer closure. Witches believe that interaction between the living and the dead is natural, and thus a coming together of the incarnate and invisible is inevitable. However, these interactions should be watched over and regulated, as there needs to be a balance. In order to maintain this equilibrium, witches will occasionally sacrifice the living. Most of the time these are animal sacrifices, but human sacrifices do also occur under the guise of the greater good. Many see witches as malevolent agents due to their stance on protecting the living from the dead being less rigid than the Banishers. However, the intent behind their actions is to maintain balance. It is not innately malicious or evil, and so some keep their support or appreciation for witches a secret. If Banishers are seen as good, witches as neutral, then in this world, demonologists are seen as agents of evil. Their main philosophy revolves around the core belief that the living must have control over the dead. The invisible is a well of untapped knowledge, and so it must be mastered at any cost. They will not hesitate to use dark rituals involving necromancy and soul submission. Demonologists are experts in the void. It is their goal to capture the demons that lurk in the void to gain further power and knowledge. Not every demonologist is looked at as evil. Some use their knowledge to defend against the legions in the void. These individuals are looked at in a more favourable light as they are protectors. Those who dabble in human sacrifice and make demonic deals are seen as the worst form of sorcerer. Banishers Ghosts of New Eden is a story-driven third-person action role-playing game where every decision you make matters. Experience what it takes to be a ghost hunter, solve haunting cases, and battle against the supernatural in a world rich with interesting lore. Banishers releases on the 13th of February and is available on PC, PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. Use the link in the description to order your copy today and begin your journey as a Banisher.